Welcome everyone. As you're signing in, we're so glad that you can join us today for this very important webinar with Dr. Maya Adam. My name is Charlene Margot and I'm the founder of the Parent Education Series and co-founder of the new nonprofit, The Parent Venture. We are again so delighted that you can join us for this very timely and important webinar. During COVID-19, there are many more families who are at home together and in the kitchen and cooking together, so we could not be more delighted to welcome Dr. Adam. You'll be hearing a little bit more about her as soon as we get through a few thank yous and format details. So again, today we have simultaneous Spanish interpretation available. So if you need Spanish, run your finger over the bottom of the screen and you'll see the interpretation globe icon. Click on the globe icon and then click on Spanish. And our interpreter, Cynthia Hinestrosa, will be providing simultaneous Spanish. So again, interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen, and then click on Spanish. We are offering today's event as part of the Parent Education mini-series, which is a special series focused on health and wellness. We are grateful, as always, to our sponsors, the Sequoia Healthcare District, and in particular today, the Sequoia Union High School District, and nonprofit, the Parent Venture. Today, we will be offering about 30 minutes of content with Dr. Adam, followed by a Q&A period, where you, the audience, hopefully will join us for some question and conversation. We ask that you put any comments in the chat. Feel free to send us comments, or not questions, but comments, talk to each other. But for questions, we would like you to use the Q&A button, again, at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So my partner, Bev Hartman, will be putting relevant links for today in the chat box. Please feel free to use that, check out those links. And then for questions, we ask that you use the Q&A button. So let me tell you a little bit more about our speaker today. Dr. Maya Adam has been teaching at Stanford University since 2009. She received her BA in human biology from Stanford before studying medicine at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Prior to her post-secondary studies, she spent 10 years as a professional ballet dancer with the State Theater of Saxony in Germany. At the Stanford School of Medicine, Adam is clinical assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics and director of Health Media Innovation. She has created online educational content for medical students, practicing physicians, and the general public. Dr. Adam is the lead instructor of 5 massive open online courses on Coursera, reaching more than 600,000 international learners. That is impact. Since 2014, Dr. Adam has been researching novel teaching approaches using video-based education, including the World Healthflix initiative started in 2020. Much of her teaching centers on maternal, child health, and nutrition, and she is the author of Food, Love, Family, a practical guide to child nutrition. Please join me in a really warm welcome for our presenter today, Maya Adam. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you so much. What a lovely welcome, Charlene. And I have to tell you, I had the pleasure of having Charlene's daughter in my class at Stanford. So funny how, we meet at different times in our lives and come back together. Charlene and Bev, please let me know if anybody has trouble hearing me or if anything happens technology-wise to get in the way. And otherwise, we'll just get started. As Bev mentioned, as Charlene mentioned, I spend a lot of my time at Stanford trying to sort of translate health research into messages that people can apply to their lives on a daily basis. So today, I'm hoping that I can keep things very simple and practical, and hopefully you'll leave today with some food for thought. Sorry, I couldn't resist. And also just some maybe mindset shifts, maybe some different ideas for ways in which to speak with your kids about food, and maybe even some ways in which you can think a little differently about food yourself. Okay, so Charlene, I think we can go for the first slide, or Bev, whoever has the slides going. Great, thank you so much. So yes, that's my welcome slide. We'll go one past that because I'd like to tell you a little story. I love starting with a story. Okay, so medicine was actually my second career. Before I went to medical school, I spent 10 years actually in the former East Germany as a professional ballet dancer. Believe it or not, my parents were horrified. They're both academics and they did not know what had gone wrong with this daughter of theirs. But I learned a lot in that career. And it was really important for me to find ways to enjoy food in a way that would keep me healthy, keep me looking good, but also in a way that would give me enough energy to dance for sometimes 6 to 8 hours a day. And in that career, I also met a lot of people who had broken relationships with food. And it was usually because they sort of feared food. They thought food was going to make them look different, get in the way of their career goals. And I often wondered why I was able to maintain a strong relationship with my food, despite the fact that there were these pressures on us to be slim and, to engage in these kind of bizarre dieting behaviors that some of the other dancers would engage in. And when I think back, I really have to say a big thanks to my family, because I grew up in a home where food was celebrated and it was sort of intertwined with love and with our family's traditions. My parents never talked about food as fuel. They talked about food as part of our history, where we came from. Growing up, we hardly ever ate out, and I know that that's changed for everyone, including my family, but dinners were almost always a family affair growing up. And they were really, in my memory, a time to touch base and to talk and to, work through anything that was going on in our lives. But what I actually realize now, only in hindsight, is that we were being educated about what real food was and how it could be used to make healthy, delicious, balanced meals. And the funny thing is that today, I'm in that same position. I have these 3 kids, and they're growing up in a very different food environment, as I know your kids are as well. And it's really a challenge to transmit that kind of positive relationship with food. And I'm also trying to teach them that food is more than just fuel. And so what I'd like to suggest to you today is that food is our history. It's where we come from. It's a reflection of where we are today. And in some ways, it's an investment in who we hope to be in the future. And if we think about food in that way, and we speak about food in that way to our kids, we can help them to have a healthier, more resilient relationship with food throughout their lifetimes. Bev, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So the reason that we're here today is because implementing that is a real challenge. It's a challenge to help our kids develop a strong, resilient relationship because of the fact that that relationship with food is threatened by our modern food environment. And it's threatened because of the way in which our food is produced, the way it's processed and packaged and marketed to us. And that whole production line separates us from our food. Think about what happens as we grow up. We come into this world, and the first source of our food is the person or the people who love us more than anything on earth, right? They're the ones who are responsible for that very first food that we eat. And they're also our source of love and care and protection. But as we grow up, that changes. And in our modern food environment, firstly, we get busier, and then there's a food industry that convinces us that food is sort of a problem that needs to be solved in our lives, and that this food industry, are the only ones that are capable of solving this problem in our lives. And the only way in which they can do that is to outsource, to take the problem away from us, solve it somewhere far, far away, and then deliver us our food as if it comes from the sky. I mean, think about how much we actually know about where our food was made, who made it, when we're talking about a lot of the commonly eaten processed or packaged foods. I know a lot of the people on this call are already people who are cooking at home, who are doing a lot of things from scratch, but I think it's fascinating because I like to think of myself as a, an informed caregiver of my children, and yet I am sometimes surprised when I look at a label on a food package and I can't recognize the ingredients. I don't know what they are, and I don't know where that was made, that food, and I really have very little connection to it. And then I've often wondered why it is that this has happened to our food. Why have food manufacturers done this to our food? And if you look at it, there's real motivation for food manufacturers to kind of start with the cheapest raw ingredients and then add stuff to it to make it taste good and remove stuff, the good stuff, so that it becomes shelf stable. And a shelf stable product is a product that basically has so few good nutrients in it that even the mold doesn't want to eat it. But if even the mold doesn't want to eat that food, is it really good enough for us and for our families? That's a question that sometimes makes me stop in my tracks when I'm about to reach for something because I'm short of time or it looks good or somebody's saying, please, can we have that? And then I stop and think, wait a minute, this is something that could last on a shelf for 8 months. So even if the mold even doesn't want to eat this food, is it really good enough for our family? And obviously the reason that this is done is that there is a vested interest in terms of the profit of the food industry to make foods that will last a long time, because then they don't go off, there's no product loss, there's no wastage, and really there's very little responsibility in the long term for our health, for the health of the consumers. Whereas compare that to a parent cooking something for a child that they are going to have in their lives for decades. And the parent is probably thinking, I really want my family to stay healthy. And so they're going to make decisions that really meet at the intersection of enjoyment and long-term health. And that's where the power lies in our hands when we start to take control over the foods that our families eat. Okay, besides that, besides the actual nutrients and lack thereof and the fact that the mold doesn't want to eat it, let's think about our relationship with food in terms of a relationship that we might have with somebody special in our lives, right? People in long distance relationships have known for many years what a struggle it is to stay close, right? It's very difficult when you don't have time together, when you don't know on a daily basis what's going on with the other person. It's very difficult to maintain a close relationship when you're very far away from somebody. And what's happened with our relationship with food is that that has also become a long distance relationship. And we need to change that if we want to make our relationship with food better. And I have some kind of examples that I've seen in popular media of how this manifests itself. One of them is a series of ads that I often speak about because I was just baffled when I first saw these ads. They're ads for an antacid, and I won't name the antacid because I want to be fair and not, target any one company. But they were ads for an antacid that showed a person. There was one with a mom at a birthday party who was going to take a bite of a burger, and then the burger bit her back. The burger started to eat this poor woman's face. And there's another one with a couple at a fair, and the guy goes to bite a corn dog, and the corn dog starts to slap his face. And there was a series of these ads where food was fighting the person that was trying to eat it. And the byline for the ad was, when your food starts to fight you, fight back by taking the antacid. And I thought to myself, that is so bizarre, because basically what this ad is telling us is it's okay If you're in an abusive relationship, you just have to learn to fight back harder. Now imagine us giving that message to our kids that, sure, just take it, keep going back to the relationship that's hurting you and just come back stronger so you can fight harder. We would never do that with our kids. We would say, get the hell out of that relationship and get into a loving relationship with your food, right? So anyway, another parallel that I thought of is, imagine if we installed a bookshelf above our beds and we were, say, new to the carpentry business, and we sat up the next morning and we bumped our head on the bookshelf and we had a sore head, and then we took an Advil for it. And then the next morning we got up and we hit our head again on the bookshelf and we took another Advil. Imagine if we kept doing that day after day. You'd never do that. You would uninstall the bookshelf and raise it or move it somewhere else, right? And that's what we have to do with our food. Okay, we can change slides now that we've talked about what the problem is. Let's talk about the solution. And then I really look forward to hearing your thoughts, because I know it's not nice when somebody drones on. Okay, so let's talk about how we can start to love the foods that are going to love us back and encourage that in our kids as well. The first thing that I want to talk about is modeling, because I know this sounds so like patronizing and it's so hard to do, and I see myself doing the wrong thing all the time, where I will like make something really healthy for the kids, and then I will forget that it's really important for me to sit down and eat it with them, especially if I'm busy with something or I'm running out the door, pre-COVID days when we used to run out the door, and you sort of try and deliver the right things to your children and you forget how important it is that you actually sit and that they see you enjoying the right foods, because at the end of the day, they're going to do what they see you doing and not what you tell them to do, as I'm sure you know. I work with a lot of parents, and I have many parents who say to me, my kids will not eat veggies. I steam them, I put butter on them, I saute them, whatever way I make it, I put it on the table and they will not eat it. And my first question to them is, are you eating it? Are you sitting with them and eating the vegetables, and not just eating them, but actually saying, oh, these are amazing. Look, these are farmers market green beans that are in season and they're so good. I mean, that is gold in terms of modeling and instilling in your kids a lifelong love of the right foods. I still remember my mom getting super excited when mangoes would come in season, because she had grown up in South Africa and they had a mango tree. And the stories she told me about that mango tree and how they would make mango pickle. And then they would, when the mangoes were ripe, they would, cut it up, and they'd, in the South African summer, they'd have like sticky faces and hands from eating the mango, and they'd fight over the seed. I remember those stories. And that for me will make mangoes taste good for the rest of my life, because it was part of my mom's history. It was part of her heritage. And so it's part of mine too. So I think that kind of modeling is amazing. Another story that I hear a lot are like parents who are absolute like model eaters. They love fresh food. They love cooking. They love doing everything. And they say to me, I don't know what it is, but my children will only eat white pasta and I don't know what to do about it. And to those parents, I say, please just keep doing what you're doing and be patient, because at the end of the day, children will come around and they'll end up modeling what they saw growing up. So even if, they're in college one day and they have their plate and they're at the buffet, their mind will go back to, how did the plate look at dinner when I was living at home? There used to be something colorful. One half of the plate was some kind of vegetable or fruit or something fresh, and the other half of the plate was divided this and this way. And they will copy what they grew up with. At the very latest, when they have their own kids, they will feed those kids in the way that they were fed. So I think having patience and being in it for the long game is really key. The other big tool that we have on our hands for anybody on this call that has a kitchen and a pot, it does not have to be a fancy kitchen or a fancy pot, but if you have any capacity to cook food at home, even if it is sauteing onions and adding some black beans and brown rice and a bit of tahine or some salt and pepper, even the simplest meal, if you instill in your kids a sense of capacity to cook and prepare your own meals, that will hold them in good stead. That will protect their health for a lifetime. Cooking is such a powerful intervention. And there's data that shows that over the past 100 years, we have literally lost the skill of cooking because it hasn't been passed on through the generations. And so that interruption in cooking has led to a whole slew of health problems. If we can harness cooking again, not as a kind of, we're going to go back to the days where Beaver Cleaver's mother was stuck in the kitchen with the apron on, but as a celebratory family thing or as a cool thing to do. We can reinvent cooking. I have a teenager who's almost 16, and he's been sort of watching these videos on social media. We'll talk about social media in a little bit. It's not all good news, but some of them are like really lovely, healthy cooking videos. And it's inspiring for him to kind of be a young guy in the kitchen who's tossing the vegetables with the frying pan, even though, of course, some of them sometimes end on the floor. But that can be such an important part of a child's identity, especially with adolescents, that they have the power, the control to make themselves meals in the way that they like. So cooking is amazing if you can build it into your lives. Okay, making kids aware of the influence of food marketing. With younger kids, when you're in the supermarket and they see a can that has Dora on it or whatever the cool thing is of today. When my kids were younger, it was like Dora and Diego. And to actually stop and say, okay, let's look at this can. Do you think Dora's in that can? This is for the little kids, right? And the little kids are smart. They'll be like, no, there's no Dora in that can. Okay, so what is in that can? Well, it's probably beans, baked beans or mushroom soup. Is that really what what makes you want me to take that down off of the shelf? Little kids are incredibly clever if you give them the opportunity to call someone out on something, and they will say, wait a minute, that's not fair. They can't put a picture of Dora on that can if there's no Dora in the can. And then obviously with older kids, making them aware of the vested interests of the food industry, asking them, if you were the CEO of a big food company and your priority every day was to wake up and sell more Cheetos than you did the day before, how much are you really going to be worried about the long-term health impact that that product has on all of the consumers all over the country that are eating your product? Are you going to, hopefully we would think our kids would have some conscience and they would think this maybe isn't the best thing I could be producing, but at least then they understand, it is for these big companies, profits are their big concern. And so being aware of that helps kids to understand why, processed foods might be less healthy in the long run than foods that are made by themselves or by people who care about them. Another thing that's really helpful with older kids is to train them instead of looking at food, because a lot of our older kids and teens, and we'll talk about this later, are actually over aware of food, right? They're like hyper aware. And sometimes they're almost a little afraid of foods and they're thinking, am I allowed to eat this? Is this unhealthy? Is this going to make me fat? Well, there are all these concerns that our older kids have about food. And what if we help them, instead of asking themselves, have I worked out enough to be able to eat this? Or is this food healthy? Am I allowed to eat it? What if they shift the question to be, is this food worthy of me? Is this food good enough for me? And does it reflect all of the hard work that I put into my schooling, into my extracurricular activities? Our kids work hard and they have very serious lives very early on. I never remember at the age of 15 being worried about where I was going to go to college. Well, I didn't go to college until I was 27, but that's a different story. But the point is that these kids have very serious lives very young. And so if we can get them to step back and say, hey, I work hard, I deserve to eat the best quality food that we can afford. And so I want to invest in maybe smaller amounts of fresh foods rather than buying foods or eating foods that are just not good enough for me. So that's another protective question. Another way of talking about this with kids, especially older kids, is to ask them this. When you are thinking about getting into a relationship with somebody, a friendship, or maybe later as they're older, maybe a romantic relationship, there are a couple of questions you would ask yourself before you would sort of charge into that relationship. And probably the big two would be, how well do I know this person? And secondly, is this person going to be good to me? Is this person going to support me and encourage me and help me achieve my dreams? What if we ask those same questions of our food? What if we looked at our food and thought, how well do I know this food? And secondly, is this food going to be good to me? Is it going to support me? So these are just some little hacks that I found interesting, and they make the kids kind of stop and go, I wonder. The last thing that I'm going to talk to you about is the practice of self-compassion. And that's something that we've seen come up in the literature quite a bit recently as an important thing for kids to understand and to keep in mind. And self-compassion, let me just start by saying, it's different from self-esteem. It's not about thinking, I'm great, I'm better than others, I can do this. Self-compassion is about treating yourself in the way that you would treat a good friend. And it becomes important because in this modern food environment that we live in, we are basically swimming upstream all the time. We're swimming upstream against kind of a current of food messaging that is constant. It's there all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. We are being messaged that we don't have time, that we need the food industry to give us easy solutions for food, and that we need that food, those food products, to make us happy. We are being given the message that those food products are going to make us happy and make us better people. So if you are constantly swimming upstream, there are definitely going to be times when you get tired or when you just get swept along with the flow. You can't be vigilant all the time, right? And in those moments, when you do get swept away or you do find yourself in a situation where there's nothing else to eat but something really unhealthy, and you know what? I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat it. Those are the moments when that's fine. It's fine. I'm going to treat myself with the self-compassion that you treat a friend. Moderation is a very protective tool to know how to use. And anything is fine in moderation. There are no forbidden foods. The second two parts of the self-compassion story are the first is understanding your life as kind of a shared common humanity. So we basically are not alone in our experience of being swept away with the tide sometimes. Everybody feels that way. Everybody finds themselves swimming against this same current, so we're not alone. And the final piece is that kind of frustration that we all feel, why can't this be easier? Why is it so hard to make the right food decisions? That feeling of frustration is just a feeling. It's not who we are. It doesn't define us. It's something outside of us. And if we acknowledge it as a feeling, then that's fine. It becomes much less important. It becomes much less a part of who we are. So I just want to kind of pause there. And I think I'm going to leave you, Bev, if we can switch one last slide, I'm going to leave you with a little wish. I've been speaking for 30 minutes now, and we're going to switch to some questions. But before we do, I just want to leave you with this wish. May the foods you eat be worthy of you, and may they be made with love. I really hope I understand your struggles, because I fight them myself every day. And I also understand the great potential for food to bring us joy if we can flip the question, if we can start thinking of food as something that supports us and something that is a source of great joy and great celebration in our lives. And so thinking about food this way and thinking about food as a great portal for love and togetherness is a very powerful way to protect our family's relationship with food. I will take questions. Any questions? I hope I can answer them.
Well, thank you, Maya. That was really revelatory. I did not know that you would be talking about food as like a literal human relationship. Amazing. I myself am half Canadian, so I was raised by a woman who immigrated from Saskatchewan and loved California and its foods. I'm probably the only Californian who loves pureed parsnips, but you know, they grew up on root vegetables, but everything in California was fresh and wonderful. So I hear what you're saying. We have some great questions from our audience, so let's dive right in. This one is from Sarah. Where should parents start if they never learned how to cook or prepare healthy foods like our families should be eating?
Okay, that is a great question. And I think, you know, we've seen this surge of interest in cooking shows. People watch all these cooking shows on television, and that's great in one way, but it's also, the downside is that it makes it seem like you have to be a trained chef in order to cook. You do not have to be a trained chef. If you can peel a carrot, you are cooking. If you can boil water, that's cooking, done. So I think starting with like the most simple things, like if you're hungry one evening and there's, you know, nothing in the house and you're thinking, okay, I'm just gonna order a pizza. I have been there, done that many times. Sometimes I stop and say, wait a minute, what if I just peeled a carrot and steamed it and, you know, put a little bit of something on it that we have and boiled some pasta and put some grated cheese on it. I bet anybody on this call could do that. And that meal, as simple as it sounds, is so much healthier and probably even a little tastier than something that would come packaged to your door a little bit cold because the DoorDash guy took a long time. And, you know, so cooking does not have to be a high wire act. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. So firstly, there are some really simple online cooking courses that are free that you can take. We offer a couple of them through Coursera, and there are plenty of other things. You can find anything on YouTube. If you want to know how to cook fish, try YouTubing simple fish and look up how people do it. It's really not rocket science. And the more you do it, the better you'll get. And you'll start to feel this sense of like, hey, I can cook, I can do this. The family likes this. I got positive feedback from my family for cooking this simple meal. And it becomes a sort of self-rewarding, and please, I'm not suggesting that there will not be times when you make something and you're like, this is disgusting. I have done it so many times. And in that moment, you have a laugh, put it aside, and maybe that night you get takeout, but it doesn't mean you failed. It means you've learned.
All right, good answer, Maya. So a couple of people have asked kind of about what we call the COVID curves. Here's a mom who's asking, my teen daughter has gained 15 pounds since March. I'm upset, but she doesn't seem to care. She really should shed those pounds. Do you have any suggestions?
This is so hard, and this is something that I am also struggling with my kids. I have seen physical changes, and it's because, of course, they are sitting in front of screens for much longer. They're not having daily PE lessons in the same way that they used to. They're not, riding their bikes to school. All of these things are missing in their lives. So step one, I think we have to just take a deep breath and say, we are in the middle of a pandemic. This is a very unique time in our lives. So firstly, do not blame yourself for that, okay? We are all trying to just get through this really unprecedented time. Secondly, you can try and have a discussion with your team. It may or may not work depending on the receptivity. Sometimes teens, I have one, they're like, get out of my face, I don't want to talk about this with you. And then that's not going to be your solution. There are other things you can do where you can try and have in the house, just have healthy foods available. I know I cringe as I say that because sometimes I find myself when I've done this and I've said, okay, I'm just going to make sure healthy foods are available so that the things that they're snacking on are fruits and vegetables, and maybe substitute the potato chips with some popcorn, or just make little changes. Have a bowl of hummus out and some carrot sticks. Have freshly washed fruit out on the counter so that when they come up in between their classes and you're busy working, they will hopefully grab those things. I have had times where I've done that to the point where it's like 9 p.m. and I'm going on my search for a little bit of dark chocolate and I can't find any in the house because I did it to myself. I made the decision not to have it there. So it's really tough because we have to do it too. We have to make sure that we don't have a lot of unhealthy things around the house. I know that teens can also leave, right? They can also put their mask on and go out and leave. So we definitely don't want to make this like a prison sentence for anybody. We want to keep it celebratory. And I would just say, use your judgment as a parent, read your child, let them know that you're going to be having really great food in the house. Ask them what their favorite fruits and veggies and healthy foods are. Take them shopping with you and make decisions together so they don't feel like they're being shoved into a corner. And then try and keep them as physically active as possible. And it's again really hard in the teenage years, but you know your child best. Like I know if my son really wants to go out and meet a friend with a mask on, I'll maybe ask him if he would mind taking his bike because I'm busy at work. So I might encourage him to, go for a walk with his friend instead of hanging out in the backyard because I have stuff going on. I find ways to make it part of their daily lives rather than saying, okay, you don't get your phone unless you, run for 30 minutes a day. It becomes really unpleasant if you have to go that route. It's a tough, tough question. I don't have an easy answer.
Thank you, though. Really good advice, Maya. So here's a question, pardon me, that a few parents had. Many say they generally eat healthy, and you touched on this, but sweets and dessert is a big tension point. Is there really a problem with having lunch or dinner end with a sweet?
Absolutely not. The question is always, what is the sweet and what is the amount of the sweet? That's always the question, So I have a sweet tooth. I'll admit to you that I have a sweet tooth, and I have learned to manage my sweet tooth in a couple of ways. And these are not ways that might work for you. I think you need to find your own ways, but I manage my sweet tooth by shifting the kind of sweets we eat. So for example, I've learned that if I buy dark chocolate and I melt it in the microwave, in 30 seconds in the microwave, and then I lay down on a sheet of parchment paper some dried cherries and some pecans, whatever nuts and fruit you like, and then pour that melted chocolate over top and just let it harden in the garage, or in the fridge it might go a bit gray because we haven't tempered the chocolate, but it doesn't matter, it's still fresh, still tastes good. And then I'll take a little bit of that bark and I'll have that as my sweet. And the kids have actually grown to like it as well now. At first they were like, oh God, that's mom's dark chocolate bark. Like, oh God. But now they kind of like it. And one day I know as adults, they might find themselves making that dark chocolate bark as well. So that's one way in which I've learned to manage and moderate, because I do feel like I need a little sweet. So that's one way to do it in a healthful way. Another thing to control amounts, for me, evenings are the worst. Like I finished my work, I'm relaxed. I feel like sometimes I just want to go back for like the second and third piece of chocolate bark. And what I do for myself is I say, okay, I have had my piece of chocolate bark. I'm going to go upstairs and brush and floss my teeth and swish with mouthwash, because the work of doing that is such a pain that if I am looking at the second piece of chocolate bark, I'm like, if I eat this thing, I'm going to have to go up and do that whole thing again. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that's enough to deter me from eating that second piece. So that's just my own personal trick. If you can find your tricks for substituting the sweet for something a little less sweet, or reducing the amount with some kind of a trick that works for you or your family, try that.
I love that. And I think my dentist would love your advice too, Maya. Here's a good question from Tressa. Our tween has decided to be a vegetarian. How do we support her while also providing nutrition for her growth?
Okay, so actually a lot of literature now is suggesting that we are actually eating far too much protein, and it is really hard actually to become protein deficient if we're eating. Okay, veganism can be tricky in terms of certain nutrients like B12, but if your daughter is eating a vegetarian diet that is a relatively balanced, if there is some egg in there, if there's some kind of dairy or dairy alternative, or some little bit of, some other source of protein in there, a little tofu maybe, or something like that, there is relatively low risk that she's going to become protein deficient. And actually being a healthy vegetarian, if it's actually vegetarian diet that involves vegetables, because you understand that you can be a vegetarian and live on Oreo cookies, and that's not healthy vegetarianism. So if this is a healthy vegetarian diet that actually includes vegetables, I would say support it. It might end up just being a phase. If you see signs that you're worried, like your child loses a lot of weight and falls below the 85th percentile for their weight, then that might be time to talk with a pediatrician and say, look, my daughter's gone on this vegetarian diet. I'm a little concerned because the weight has dropped off. That's a separate question. But a vegetarian diet, I would say let them try it. It'll just be a bit of a pain because you may have to make a separate meal. If the others are eating something meat-based, you might have to put a portobello mushroom with some cheese and red onion on the side for her. But it's worth it to just support them in that way if you can.
So we have so many good questions coming in. We're probably not going to be able to get to all of them, but let's keep going for a few minutes. Switching gears a little bit, Maya, a parent asks, what do you do about food insecure families who may not be able to afford or have access to some of the fresh, healthy foods that we've been talking about?
Yes, excellent question. And it is really a challenge for so many families in our area that face food insecurity. And I would say, we're all, best we can do is to do the best we can with the resources that are available to us. If you can even, rather than getting a fast food meal, if you can substitute that with something more, a healthy traditional meal like black beans and brown rice, or lentils and brown rice. I'm thinking of my own heritage, which is like Indian food, which is naturally low cost, but also very nutritionally balanced in terms of, and I'm not talking about restaurant Indian food, but like real Indian food, which is like the steamed brown rice and the lentils. That can be very satisfying food that's low cost, and that's really also can be a celebration of our traditions and our heritage. So that's one way, is to sort of go back to the way our grandmothers and great grandmothers ate. Sometimes that helps. I recognize the challenges that many families face in this area, and it's not easy.
Thank you. Well said. And just for those of you who are watching, please let anyone know that the school districts, including the Sequoia Union High School District, are providing free food for families, including children under 18 in the families. So check the website, check the district website and your school websites for the drop-off locations at the schools and the main food kitchen in Redwood City where you can get those meals. And they are healthy and they are prepared with as much whole food and whole grains as they can. All right, a number of parents had questions about kids with allergies or pre-diabetes. Do you have any suggestions for children with allergies that have grown up with food being scary?
Well, gosh, do I have things to say. I have a celiac child, so I hear you, I feel your pain. To be the only kid from the age of 3 that cannot go into a bakery and have what all the other kids are having, like, can you imagine that there's this beautiful, fresh smelling bread that everybody's salivating over, and you know that eating that bread could literally tear apart your intestinal tract. I mean, that is scary for kids. And the only way that I've been able, and I've racked my brain about how we make this not scary for a child that is going to have this problem for the rest of their lives, I think the only way to do it is to make the alternative so celebratory and so fun. Like to say, yeah, we're gonna learn to bake gluten-free sourdough, and we're gonna learn to bake or make the nicest quality food that we can afford together, and it's going to be so much better than anything else. I mean, that was how I did it when he was little. I made him feel like the food that we were eating was better because of his food allergy, call it that. And so I tried to make it very celebratory. And then when we would go out, like if he would go to a birthday party, I would bake with him 12 cupcakes, beautiful cupcakes, homemade. We would obviously try and control the sugar a little bit, but then he would have something to offer and share with others. And often people were like, oh my God, these are really good. And he would feel proud about the food that he was eating instead of feeling like he was on like a medical diet. So my basic advice is look at the foods they can eat and get them to love being involved with the creation of those foods that they can eat, to the point where they think they're actually eating better foods than the general public.
That is great advice. It's like the advice that we give to parents using the term at opportunity instead of at risk for kids who are in disadvantaged settings. I just love that advice. So here's one that I know parents of teenagers can relate to. What if your teens eat junk food before dinner and just refuse to eat what I made for dinner?
Yeah, welcome to having a teenager. Is this not a funny time? You know, my mother used to say to me when I was a teenager, she used to look at me and say, may you have a child just like you. And it's so funny because, you know, inevitably, teenagehood is a time when we want to do exactly what is going to annoy and upset our parents. And it's our way of separating and, you know, establishing our own 2 feet. It's probably not something that's going to persist for a lifetime. So I would say your best bet is probably sometimes to just let it go and keep making the beautiful food, keep the dinner as fun and celebratory as possible. Don't make it like you will sit down anyway. Even if you are full, you're gonna sit with us because it's dinner time. No teen wants to sit there for that. Rather make it feel like they're missing out on something, you know? Make, like, if you have other kids, maybe prepare something with the other kids, or prepare something that you are gonna delight in eating and put it on the table and invite your teen to come and maybe ask them about something totally unfood related that they want to talk about, and ask them about it and give them a compliment and see if maybe they'll just gently come to the table because of that. And then if they want to eat, great. And if they don't want to eat, that's their prerogative.
Really good advice. I know that sometimes as parents, the best we can do is really nudge kids and model, as you say, we can't change everything overnight, and certainly COVID has made a lot of things around food more difficult. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. So here, this is a good one. I was advised by my child's pediatrician to add butter and high-calorie food to their diet because they're actually on the lighter side compared to average kids. We're very healthy. I don't normally cook with butter. Do you have suggestions about how to get calories in a kid's diet that are healthy?
Yes, so there are many alternatives to butter in your child's diet. If you don't want to feed your child butter, which I would, I understand large amounts of butter are probably not healthy for any of us. Things like nuts, healthy oils, avocados. You can make, cookies with you can reduce the sugar in them, but you can use nice almond butter and almonds. You can, in their breakfasts, you can just slice up a nice avocado and put a little bit of salt and pepper on it and serve it on the side of some scrambled eggs. If they'll eat cheese, you can add a little bit of cheese. Take whatever foods your child likes that also fit in with the way you eat, and just try and nudge them in the direction of higher calorie foods, but in the right way, in a way that fits with your family's culture.
Speaking of culture, a few people had questions about acidic foods. Here is someone who wrote and said, my husband is Latino and he grows chilies, tomatoes, and limes. We really want to eat them, but they give us a stomach ache. Any ideas?
I think balance is always good. I mean, sometimes the foods we love the taste of, they can, in certain amounts, they can make us not feel great. So I think try and play with the amounts, and don't cut it out completely if you enjoy it, but maybe eat it together with something that sort of buffers it a little bit, and experiment. See how much is really too much for your own body. Listen to your body when you're eating, and just try and really hear what it's telling you.
Okay, great one. Again, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask you a question about resources. Here's a parent. Anne writes, I have a child who's about 9. We agree with your point about not having unhealthy things in the house, but she's always hungry and prefers a larger portion size. Any advice for teaching portion control?
Yes, and the advice is some advice that I'm sure you've heard before. So I forget who wrote this in their wonderful book on diet for kids, but they said it's our job as parents to provide healthful options, and it's the job of the child to say how much and which of those healthful options they want to eat. So if you have a 9-year-old who's hungry, as long as that 9-year-old is eating foods that are real foods, that's fine. I wouldn't try and artificially teach portion control. I would say at that age, especially if you're not dealing with any other health issues, I would say you provide the healthful options and let the child decide how much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Adam. We have wonderful questions. I wish we could get to them all, but the last thing I'm going to ask is, and we can send this in a follow-up email, do you have any websites or resources that you recommend for working parents to help our families eat healthy?
Oh my goodness, there's so much out there. I don't know where to start. I mean, we have a course on Coursera called Introduction to Food and Health that has very simple, short videos. They feature Michael Pollan in the days when Michael Pollan was very focused on food and really had some fantastic advice to give to all of us. And so there's also a little cooking segment in there. So there are those sorts of things. YouTube is a great source of ideas for, how to change things up and make something new. I think just, making the time, if you're a busy parent, to get to the store and buy those fresh fruits and vegetables, or somehow get them brought to you if you don't like going and choosing them yourself. If you have them in your house, you're much more likely to consume them. And so that would be my best advice.
Great advice. My daughter is growing tomatoes on her balcony, so she's listening to you, Maya.
Okay.
We have had so many wonderful questions and so much great discussion. I want to thank Dr. Maya Adam and all of you who asked all these wonderful questions. Our apologies if we didn't get to everything. This event will be video recorded and available on our YouTube channel. So I hope that all of you will log in to our newsletter and check out our video library on YouTube. But again, thank you, Dr. Adam, for today's wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you soon.